Welcome to Module C, Lecture 2. In this lecture, we shall discuss about trip classification and also try to identify factors which affect trip generation. In lecture C.1, we said what we try to do when we are going for trip generation, basically converting activities into number of trips or number of trip ends. Then we said that every trip has got an origin and a destination. Similarly, every trip has got a point of production and a point of attraction. How we identify the end which is production, what will be the other end or the attraction. Then we also discussed about the various basic considerations, say when we are talking about trip generation, then both amount and character of urban activities are important. The transport system again the influence the trip generation, but we said that for generally we do not consider this, but that effect or impact is there very much. Then we talked and about the influence of location of urban activities on trip generation, and then also discussed about the role of special generators in the context of trip generation. Say for example, a hospital or airport or a stadium or large scale regional shopping center and so on. So, how we and why we need to consider them separately and their impact on the trip generation. Now, with this background, today we shall talk about trip classification. Now, why we first of all we are interested in trip classifications. Very first reason is that different types of trips have specific spatial and temporal characteristics. Office trips are attracted to office location at certain time. So, the roads which are leading to office areas will obviously get congested when people are making work trips or trips to office. Similarly, when if there are all schools located in certain areas, then depending on the school timings. Okay. So, depending on the school timings, people will actually go for drop off and again go for pick up in the afternoon. So, those are the times when the roads which are leading to school will all get congested. So, every different types of trip have got different spatial and temporal characteristics. So, it is necessary to identify various types of trip which are relevant to a particular study. Any study is carried out with some objectives in mind, some problems. Maybe we are interested to carry out transportation study because we want to ease the traffic congestion during the peak hour, which are typically due to work trip, or maybe we want to improve the traffic circulation on roads around the schools in urban area, or maybe somewhere the weekend recreational trips, so many people come and create so much of congestion and pollution and all those problems. So, we want to address those. So, depending on what are my key objectives for taking up a particular study, accordingly we need to identify the trips and classify trips, because different trips have different spatial and temporal characteristics. So, here are again as I have indicated in the slides that there are different ways we can classify the trips. Let us go one by one and try to understand them. One way of classifying trips is based on the home end reference as origin or destination. As I said, home end is there, one end is home. So, obviously, always the trip production happens at the home end. That home end may be origin, may be destination. Okay. So, if we consider this, then we can classify trip like home based trip, non home based trip, a simple classification. That means, where one way of classifying looking at the trip is home based trips and non home based trip. In home based trips, home of the trip maker is either the origin or the destination of the trip. For example, trips between home to work, trips between home to school, between home and school, between home and work, home and shopping center. So, either a person going from home to work or work to home, or home to school or school to home to shopping areas or shopping centers and shopping centers to home, all are home based trip, because either the origin or the destination includes home. The second is non home based trips. That means, in this case neither the origin nor the destination includes home end. So, that is non home based trip. So, business trips between two places, maybe somebody is going to the corporate office and from corporate office going to the manufacturing units and coming back, or from corporate office you go to the office and from office you go to bank and come back. So, the trip what happened, neither end is actually home end. So, they are all non home based trip. So, maybe we, depending on the context of the study, we are interested to know how many are home based trips and how many are non home based trips, and maybe that is the most appropriate classification for the work. Similarly, another way of looking at it may be based on purpose. The purpose may be contextual depending on the study. As I said, maybe the objective is to understand, improve the traffic circulation around schools during the school opening and closing hours. So, I want to find out how many actually educational trips are happening, school, college, all this, okay? Because my focus may be that one. Or if I want to know that there is a large shopping areas and the roads leading to that shopping center or shopping area is all these roads, the congestion is a problem and you want to solve it. So, you may try to identify how many shopping trips are happening. That may be of interest to that study, for that study. So, I have indicated here that how we can classify trips based on the purpose of the trip, maybe work trips, business trips, educational trips, shopping trips, social trips, recreational trips, a larger classification or a smaller classification, right, more number or less number of groups or category we can make, again depending on the requirement of the project or requirement of the work. But I have tried to indicate here that these are all different way based on the purpose we can actually classify trips, right. And then what kind of classification will be appropriate for a particular project, that you have to apply your judgment, right. You may not use all these 6 types of trip in every project, may not be necessary. Maybe I can simply do it work and non-work, okay, right, or educational and other trips, depending on what is my focus, what is my objective of doing this type. So, I have said here a larger or smaller number of trip classes may be appropriate for a particular urban area, depending on its size, how much is the contribution. I do not want to classify a trip separately if that contribution of the trip in overall number of trips is really very insignificant, then there is no point in making a separate classification. Because the idea is to find out contributions which are actually reasonable and contributing significantly to the transportation problems. So, purpose of demand forecast, why we are doing, what problem we are trying to solve, what are the dominance of particular trips in that area depending on the land use. If the schools are not located in that area, then school trips may not be really prominent there. So, there is no point in making a separate classification, right. And if there is there is no recreational facilities in that zone, so there is no point for me to classify separately, create a category of like recreational trips, which will hardly have any contribution there, right. So, all these are to be considered, but remember that there are different ways, very interesting ways we can look at the trips. So, one way of looking at is, as I said earlier, whether the home is there in one end, either origin or destination. So, that is one way, home, non-home, and also here based on the purpose. Then based on the location of origin and destination of trips and or destination of trips. With reference to a study area, the trips may be internal or external. What do you mean by that? We say that there is a cordon line. Cordon line is demarcating the study area, right. So, the cordon line is demarcating the study area. So, with reference to cordon line, I can say anything which is happening here within the study area, that is internal, and outside the study area anything is happening, that is external. Similarly, with the reference to a zone boundary also, what is happening within the zone is internal, anything happening outside is external. That is a simple way, internal, external. We can also look at it when we look with reference to traffic zones, then trips may be classified as interzonal, intrazonal and external. What do you mean by that? Intrazonal means trips are happening within that zone itself. Trip produced in zone I and terminating also in zone I. So, nothing is going outside zone I, all within that zone, that is intrazonal, within the zone. Interzonal, one zone to another zone, getting produced in zone 2 going to zone 3, outside zone 2 or outside the zone where it is actually produced, that is interzonal. The other is external, where nothing is happening within this zone. So, any trip which has, maybe you can also consider the bigger boundary, if I consider the zone boundary. So, any trips which are has nothing to do with this study area is external. Interzonal trips with reference to a study area may further be classified as, not all these trips, I would say, why only interzonal trips? Okay. Interzonal, intrazonal, external, all can be classified further into these 4 groups: internal, 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 external, external, internal and external, external. Let me explain you very clearly. Let us say we have n1 number of zones we are considering within the study area. That means, I have actually demarcated my study area using a cordon line. So, within that cordon line boundary, we have the study area or the the city area which is I am considering for my study, and let us say I have divided it into n1 number of zones. So, I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 up to n1 number of zones. So, all these n1 zones are internal with respect to the study area boundary, because they are all within my study area. So, any movement that is happening within the zones or in between zones within this study area is internal. That means, trip is getting produced in any one of these N1 zones and getting attracted also to any one of these N1 zones. So, that means, that trip is not at all going outside, everything is within that cordon boundary, right. So, this blue portion what I have shown here, that shows that segment internal. I have N1 number of zones. So, N1 by N1 matrix represents N by N matrix, right, representing the zones within the study area, and any movement that is happening within that, it is basically I can call it internal with reference to my cordon boundary or study area boundary. Then some trips are getting produced within these N1 zones, but actually going outside. So, trips produced within the study area, any one of these N1 zones, but going outside this cordon line. Now, external also there are some zones, number of zones we can consider externally. So, let us say I have N2 number of zones which are external. So, total my zone number of zone is N1 plus N2, N1 internal zones within the study area and N2 zones which are external. So, total number of zones I am considering in my work is N1 plus N2. So, look at this green segment, this portion, what is really happening? I have written as IE. Here the trip is produced, how I can interpret a cell in this one? Ij, produced in I getting attracted to zone j, right, Tij. So, produced in any one of these N1 zones, but getting attracted to this N2 zones, any one of these N2 zones. So, that is internal external, getting produced internally, getting attracted outside, internal external. Similarly, it may happen that trips are getting produced in one of these N2 zones, external zones, but getting attracted to this study area. That means, getting attracted to any one of the zones within this study area. That means, any one zone within this N1 number of zones, that is shown here as EI. This is the segment produced externally, external to study area, but getting attracted internally. The last bit of this representation is external. That means, produced in one of these N2 zones, external zones, getting attracted also to this one of these N2 external zones. Nothing, neither the production is within the study area, not the trips getting attracted within the study area finally. Production is also happening in one of these N2 external zones, attraction is also happening to this one of these N2 external zones. So, we can call it as external, and that is what I said in some other context earlier, that is the typical segment which we should consider if we are thinking of a bypass for a town. If that external is significant, that means they are all getting captured at external cordons. Why? Because the road is passing through the city, but the traffic has nothing to do with the city. So, if that external is really significant, then it makes sense probably to investigate if a bypass is feasible. So, that You do not allow this traffic to go inside the city and create congestion, create emission. You create a bypass. So, outside the city only they get connected, right? They do not come inside the city. This is again one way of looking at my trips. So, again you can see here we are not looking at the purpose or anything. Here it is basically the location of origin or destination of the trips, that becomes important. We can also think the classification of trips based on day or time of making trips. Again another dimension of the trip, just see how many dimensions we have for a trip, how many ways we can look at the trips, and all this will give you some kind of insight that in what work, what way I should look at the trip. Maybe in one project I will look at the trip based on purpose, in another way I would look at the trip at external, in another project maybe I would look at the trip from the day or time of making trips. When the trip is being made, peak hour, peak period, off peak period, in the weekend, typical weekday, they will mean entirely different thing. So, this is again one way, because you see the congestion, most urban area congestion is due to peak hour trips. So, if you see the total number, a road capacity is fixed, every hour a road can handle so many vehicles or so much of traffic. So, road capacity may be fixed per hour, and if you say in most urban area the total daily demand is less than the capacity of the road into 24, that value significantly lower. So, if I consider daily theoretically how many vehicles this road can take. So, whatever is the road capacity per hour into 24, that is the theoretically I can consider the capacity. So, if you look at the demand will nowhere be near that value, but still why this congestion happens? Because most of the trips or a larger number of trips or larger share of trips happen only during the peak hour or peak period. So, maybe if peak hour congestion is my focus, I am only interested to know how much peak hour demand is there. What is the peak hour travel? So, my simple classification of trips could be peak and off peak, or peak and other than peak, whatever you say, right. So, that way I would like to classify. Sometimes the weekday you go to some area, no problem, some recreational center, you go to that area in the Saturday evening with lot of restaurants, lot of other recreational facility, the area is totally congested. So, there you want to know, you are interested that in a typical weekend what is happening, not in the weekday. So, again it depends on what is the objective, what you are trying to solve. We can also look at the trips based on the socio-economic characteristics of the trip maker. How many trips are being made? I can classify then based on the income, how many high income group people, how many trips are making, low income group trip, how many are making, because the requirements will be different. Requirements of different socio-economic segments are different. A high income person and a low income person's requirement in terms of the trip, in terms of expectation, even the bus service, most urban areas we are failing to attract because our service is not as per the expectation of the choice riders. Choice rider means those who have access to private vehicle. If you have a vehicle of your own, you are a choice rider to public transport, because public transport is a matter of choice for you. You may go, you may not go. Even if you do not go to public transport, you have your vehicle, you can travel. So, you are choice riders. If I do not have the car, then I am not a choice rider. Why? Because I have to use only public transport. So, the trips may be classified in terms of personal income or household income, maybe car ownership. We want to know car owners and others, those who do not have car. Maybe I can classify trip based on the household size. I discussed this to some extent earlier also. So, the socio-economic characteristics of trip makers, I can look at the trips from that specs. I am looking at the trips, how different socio-economic segments are making trips, car owner, non-car owner, high income, low income, and so on and so forth. Then also the whole trips I can try to classify based on mode used for trip making. Ultimately, how in urban area, especially bigger cities, there are multiple options for transport, right. Some people use car, some people use taxi, some people use public transport or bus, even non-motorized mode. Very important. Actually, we are forgetting, the more and more we are going for motorization and going more and more trips we are making using motorized transport, we are inviting more and more problem for all of us in terms of congestion, in terms of degrading the air quality. Look at the air quality in urban areas, especially the big cities, right. It is a pity what we have done. We have really done the development, or we are doing something seriously wrong and injustice to us and the future population. What kind of cities we are living for them, for the future generations. So, very important is also the, so we can even simply think how the different modes are being used. I want to make the trip, because maybe I want to see then how many people are actually using car and taxi. Can I shift some of them, not all, but even if say 5% or 10% if you want, if you shift, you can make it happen in favor of the bus or the public transport system in general, which may be bus or maybe rail also, right. That may make big difference in the whole urban transport environment. So, maybe my interest could be, if I am working on the public transport, I have to how to improve public transport, how to bring more people to public transport. If that is what is my key objective, then I may be interested to know that trip matrix separately, that who are the car users, who are the taxi users, who are the public transport user, how many are using non-motorized mode, or even if I want to promote non-motorized mode, it is very important for me to have a trip classification in that manner. So, that is another way of looking at the trips, what kind of mode is used for the trip. So, that is different ways we can look at the trips and to develop our understanding, insights, and then adopt the most suitable classification, what is really most appropriate for a given context, given work. Now, I want to discuss, there are different factors which are affecting trip generations. What are those factors? These factors I want to discuss separately for person trips and for goods trips. First, coming to the person trips. Person trips context, the productions and attractions are different, even for goods trips also the productions and attractions are different. So, what are the typical factors that affect trip generation? Generation means trip production specifically. 1. Income, 2. Car ownership, 3. Household structure, 4. Family size, 5. Value of land, 6. Residential density, and 7. Accessibility. So, we have identified here 7 factors which are important for trip generation context. Now, if you look at it, income, obviously high income more trips, car ownership, those who have car they make more trips than normally households who do not have cars or people who do not have car. Family size, bigger, smaller is again important. Bigger the family size, generally per household trips will be higher, expected to be higher. And you can see the first 4 attributes are typical to household characteristics. So, that means they are very useful if I am developing a model where I am trying to model the trip generation, trip productions by household. So, how many trips will be produced by a household? So, household is my unit for analysis and I am trying to analyze the trip productions by households. So, then I can use household income, household car ownership, household structure, household family size and so on. Then the value of land and residential density, they are really meaningful. If you see indirectly where the value of land is higher, think of any area of a city, big city where high income people live and infrastructure is much better and facilities, amenities are better, there the value of land will be higher. So, value of land is also an indication that higher the value of land, you are likely or you may get even higher trip productions from that area. But can we use that value of land if we are considering households as our unit? We cannot use it, right. So, the value of land can be used typically if we are using zonal based model. That means different traffic zones or traffic analysis zones, what we say that study area divided into number of zones, or in the just a few minutes back I was saying n1 number of zones within the study area. So, if we are trying to model the trip generation or trip production by zones, then we can use this one. Same the residential density is a very meaningful indicator. Higher the residential density, higher will be the trip productions. Obviously, more higher density will produce more trips. But then again, residential density we can use only for the zonal based model, not household based model. It does not make sense. So, the first 4 are typically may be used for household based model. If we are taking household as our smallest unit for analysis and modeling, value of land, residential density we can use for zonal based model. Accessibility, the last one, it is very much interesting. What we are saying that trip production, again as I said, actually is elastic to the available transportation system performance. How your connectivity is there, whether the public transport is available. If it is available, then what is the level of service that is there, right. So, higher level of service, better transportation system and resulting better accessibility will make the trip production higher, more trips will get produced. So, it is very meaningful if we can include accessibility in the trip generation model, but as I said we normally do not consider the trip generation elastic or influenced by the transportation system or accessibility. So, they are meaningful, but generally not considered. So, that is what. So, if I go back to the next slides, here some explanation I have given. As I said, I have written here probably income, car ownership, household structure and family size, they are generally used in household trip generation studies. Value of land and residential density are typical to zonal studies. When you take traffic analysis zone as your unit, you are trying to model how many trips will get produced from a zone. Or in the first case, household base, how many trips will be produced by a household. Two things are different. Then as I said that accessibility expressed in terms of distance, time, cost, but rarely used in the modeling. Although inclusion of accessibility is meaningful as it offers a way to make the trip generation elastic or responsive to the changes in the transportation system. Actually, it happens like that. Actually, it influences. But as I said, then many assumptions we made, many simplification we make in our model and work. So, this is one of the assumptions. And if you ask me personally, I will say yes, it is a compromise, but the effect of transportation system is very high on route choice, on mode choice, and such kind of huge change in the transport network does not happen every day or so frequently in an urban area to impact the trip generation in a big way. It may change, but is it that the whole changes happen so frequent and the impact on the trip generation, the impact of transportation system of trip generation is expected to be little lower on than the impact on choice of mode or choice of routes and other things. Then in terms of attraction, when we are doing the modeling the person trip attraction, we should definitely consider different types of land use, say for educational, commercial, employment centers, recreational facilities, etc. So, different types of land use we consider. So, categorization of land use we do. So, these are different land use are may enter into a model as variables. Similarly, we can use let us say 4 floor space available. This is the first one is basically the character, look at it. First one is basically the character of the activities, right, character of land use, what kind of land use. The second is the amount, how much floor space is available for industrial, for commercial and for other services. So, more the space, higher the number, and the first one is basically the character of activity or character of land use, commercial, educational, employment centers, recreational centers and so on and so forth. Zonal employment under different categories, a number of different categories are made from for employment. The economic census data actually indicate they use different classifications. So, all those categories of employment can be utilized. Total employment you can use manufacturing employment and like that different categories of employment to see that how they are influencing or explaining the trip attraction to a zone. Again here also accessibility and locational factors. We said that earlier discussion in lecture 1 under this module, we said that the locational factors are important. A shopping complex located in the heart of the CBD with wider roads and footpaths and enough parking space, very well planned, and in a suburb where 2 vehicles cannot go side by side, the attractions are not going to be same. So, the locational factors are also important, and that is what we have said. And accessibility means the transport connectivity or the characteristics of transportation system that is there. So, all these are going to influence or impact the trip attractions. Then freight trips, very important in an urban area, very important. Often we see trucks and commercial vehicles on road and we feel disturbed because they really contribute significantly to congestion, that we cannot deny. But just imagine, even during COVID, people did not go outside for work, did not make any other trips, but the supply of food and logistics, it was very, very important. Without that, people cannot live, right. So, the goods transport are actually much more important for us. It is okay if people cannot go to office for 2 days or a few days, if people cannot go for recreational trips for some months, but people cannot stay without food, right. So, food, vegetable, all these things, essential commodities, groceries, medicines, all are actually coming under freight transport. So, they are very important. So, there are several factors which influence the freight transport production and attraction. I would just identify a few here. Before that, what I said here, I have written the similar thing. Freight trips normally account for lesser vehicular trips, but may still be significant in terms of their contribution in road traffic congestion. That is, I said also exactly the same thing. If there are few trucks or heavily loaded commercial vehicle, the whole nature of the traffic stream will change and the congestion will also be very different. There are factors which normally used for vehicle trip productions and attractions, say for example, number of employees, number of sales, roofed area for farm, total area for farm, all these are extremely important. Then accessibility and type of farm, again are two variables which are very meaningful variables, I would say, but again generally not used as explanatory variables for freight modeling, productions and attractions modeling. But if we include them, they are meaningful, especially the type of form. Actually, the goods transport is extremely complex and the type of form has really got a big role to play in terms of the trip productions and attractions. Different commodity have got different transport requirements. So, if we are considering using type of form as a variable in our trip generation modeling for freight trips, that will mean by different industries and productions have different transport requirements, and that actually will get captured in the model. Okay. So, the accessibility is again an important, how well the places are connected. So, as it is important for the passenger trips, it is also for the goods trip. So, here are the factors, and as I said that the accessibility and type of form are the two variables which are extremely meaningful. If we can include them, there is a different meaning for that, right. So, it is all very much important. So, if I have to summarize this lecture, I would say that there are different ways we can look at the trips. There are really so many characteristics of trip and so many ways one can look at this same trips which are happening in the urban area. It depends on the context, which way it is meaningful to look or to classify trips, that directly relates to the what is the objective, end of the day what we are trying to achieve. So, we may classify trips in terms of based on home and reference as origin or destination. So, home based, non home based, that was the fundamental classification. Then we say based on purpose of the trips, and I explained clearly that why this is meaningful, the work trip, education trips, social trips, recreational trips, right, and so on and so forth. Then with reference to location of origin or destination of trips, internal, external, internal, external, internal, internal, external, internal, external, external, and I say that when and where, what type of classification would be really appropriate. Also classifying trip based on when it is happening. Is it happening in the peak hour or peak period or off peak period? It is in the weekday, it is in the weekend. So, day and time of making trips based on the socio-economic characteristics of the trip maker, high income, low income, and so on and so forth. There are different characteristics which are important. Then also looking at the trip based on mode used for trip makings, car trips, taxi trips, public transport trips, NMT, non-motorized transport trips. So, different mode wise we try to model the trip productions and attractions. That also is very interesting and may be meaningful in some cases. So, with that kind of overview about the trip classification, then we identified the major factors which affect the productions and attractions of person trips and freight trips. Initially, we talk about the factors which influence the person trips production. Then we said that several factors which are meaningful for household based model, then some factors which are typically for zonal based model, and then we say talk about accessibility or the role of transportation that actually it influences, but maybe most cases we do not consider that. Then talked about the factors which are maybe used for modeling of trip attractions, person trip attractions, and then finally, we discuss various factors which are important for goods trips productions and attractions. So, with this I close this lecture. Thank you so much.